When you think about learning a new language, the first image that probably pops into your head is just this massive, incredibly heavy textbook.
Oh, absolutely. The classic vocabulary lists.
Right. You picture yourself sitting at a desk late at night, memorizing endless lists of words and trying to, I don't know, snap together these rigid grammar rules like they're little plastic building blocks.
Yeah, noun goes here, verb goes here.
Exactly. Object goes here. It feels like an engineering project.
It really does. It's this very mechanical, almost mathematical approach to human communication. And, well, while it might look clean and organized on paper, it is almost completely disconnected from the messy, fluid reality of how people actually speak.
And that disconnect is exactly why today's deep dive is so crucial. We've got our hands on a really fascinating guide, and it's specifically designed for beginner English learners.
Yes, and it takes a very different approach.
It really does. Our mission today is to unpack this source for you, strip away all those boring theoretical textbook rules, and discover how dissecting specific natural phrases actually reveals the hidden architecture of how native speakers communicate.
It's all about the underlying structure.
Right. So we are going to focus specifically on the grammar behind conversational patterns. Phrases like "it seems" or "I would rather." And the most fascinating part, this guide insists that to unlock fluency, beginners should focus entirely on sentences that are strictly between 8 to 15 words long.
Which is just a remarkably practical philosophy, and it completely flips the traditional script, right on its head.
It really does.
The core idea here is to avoid those disjointed, overly complex sentences that textbooks just love to use. The ones that test your knowledge of really obscure rules.
Yeah, the ones no one actually says in real life.
Exactly. But to really grasp why this specific 8 to 15 word parameter works, we first have to understand the mechanism the source suggests learners use. It introduces this concept of shadowing.
Shadowing. Usually when I hear that word, I think of like a detective following someone down a dark alley.
Right.
How does that actually apply to language learning?
Well, vocally, it's kind of similar. It's this concept of following closely behind.
Yeah.
The idea is to use shadowing audio or video where you listen to a native speaker say a phrase and you immediately repeat it back. You're mimicking the rhythm, the intonation, and the stress perfectly.
So you aren't pausing to translate each word in your head?
No, not at all. The goal is to gradually introduce higher level grammatical structures through this physical repetition rather than, studying the rules in a vacuum.
That makes a lot of sense.
You are essentially learning the music of the language, not just the lyrics.
I love that framing. It actually makes me think of traditional language learning as trying to bake a complex cake by just memorizing the list of ingredients.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. Like you memorize the word for flour, you memorize eggs, you memorize sugar. But knowing the ingredients doesn't mean you have any idea how they react when you mix them together.
Or what temperature the oven needs to be.
Exactly. You end up with a bowl full of raw flour and whole eggs and wonder why it doesn't taste like a cake.
That is a brilliant analogy, because when you only learn isolated words, you are totally missing the chemistry of the language.
Yeah.
This shadowing method, it's like learning to bake by actually standing next to a master chef, mixing the batter with them, feeling the consistency change, You're understanding the rhythm of the whole process.
You're experiencing the whole phrase as a single, unified thing.
Exactly.
I can see how that builds momentum.
Yeah.
But I have to put myself in the shoes of a true beginner for a second, because the premise feels a bit intimidating.
How so?
Well, if this guide is for beginners, isn't an 8 to 15 word sentence terrifyingly long? If I'm starting from zero, shouldn't I be starting with a 3-word sentence like, I don't know, I like cats, or the sky is blue?
It definitely feels counterintuitive at first glance, I get that. But if we dig into the cognitive science behind the source text's logic, that 8 to 15 word range is actually the optimal sweet spot for human memory.
Wait, really?
Yeah. A 3-word sentence like, I like cats, offers zero context. It doesn't teach you how words interact with each other in the wild.
Okay.
It doesn't show you how native speakers use filler words or how they connect ideas. It is just an isolated data point.
So it's kind of like learning a single guitar chord but never learning how to transition to the next one.
Precisely. You can strum it all day, but you're not making a song.
Right.
On the other hand, an 8 to 15 word sentence is just long enough to provide a natural context, a complete nuanced thought, but it's short enough to actually hold in your short-term memory.
Okay, I see.
In cognitive science, there's this concept involving the phonological loop.
The phonological loop.
Yeah, which is basically the part of your working memory that deals with spoken and written material. It can hold about 2 seconds of audio. And a naturally spoken 8 to 15 word sentence fits perfectly right into that 2 second window.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
It really is. It teaches you grammatical patterns as a single chunk, rather than forcing your brain to frantically assemble 15 individual words on the fly.
So by shadowing these specific chunks, you're being exposed to the actual load-bearing architecture of a conversation, rather than just being handed a single brick and told to build a house.
You're learning the entire mechanism, and that is where the source material gets incredibly useful, because it curates these sentences based on real-world utility.
Which brings us to how we actually apply this internally. So we figured out how the shadowing mechanism works. Let's look at what these chunks actually look like when we use them to express our daily feelings and thoughts.
Yes, the daily application is key.
There are a couple of phrases the guide highlights that struck me as incredibly common, but honestly really hard to explain mechanically. One is the phrase, everything seems to be getting better little by little.
A very natural sentence.
And another one is, it looks like it's going to rain, so don't forget your umbrella.
What's fascinating about those two examples is the grammar of observation. Both seems to be and looks like serve a very specific, almost defensive function in spoken English.
Defensive.
Yeah, they are softeners.
Softeners, meaning they take the edge off a statement so it doesn't sound so aggressive.
They mitigate risk. When you are speaking naturally in any language, you rarely want to state a developing situation as a hard, static, undeniable fact because, frankly, you might be wrong.
That's very true.
If you look at dark clouds and declare it is going to rain and then the sun comes out 10 minutes later, your credibility takes a minor hit.
You look a bit silly.
Exactly. But if you say it looks like it's going to rain, you are expressing an observation based on current visual evidence. You're describing a developing situation, not a confirmed reality.
It's like building a linguistic escape hatch into your sentence.
Yeah.
You're giving yourself permission to be wrong without looking foolish.
It protects the speaker, yeah. But it also does something else. It invites agreement from the listener.
Oh, how so?
Well, if I say everything seems to be getting better, I am not declaring that absolute perfection has been achieved. I am sharing a feeling of optimism based on a trend.
Right. You're leaving room for me to chime in.
Exactly. I'm leaving space for you to say, yeah, I think so too. It's collaborative. It is just much more human than stating a sterile fact.
We use these patterns constantly to navigate the uncertainty of daily life. And it gets even more nuanced when we look at how we describe our own internal states.
Oh, definitely.
The text offers a pair of examples that deal with our moods and expectations. There's this sentence, I don't feel like going out because I'm too comfortable at home.
Very relatable.
Right. And another one, I wasn't expecting that, but it turned out really well.
Those are brilliant examples of why shadowing these specific 8 to 15 word chunks is so much more effective than textbook learning.
Let's break that down.
Sure. Let's look at the phrase feel like, followed by a verb ending in ing. I don't feel like going out. In textbook English, a beginner who is translating directly from their native language might construct the sentence, I do not want to go out.
Which feels very different.
Because want is a very strong, almost demanding verb.
Yeah, saying I do not want to go out makes you sound like a toddler throwing a minor tantrum because they have to eat their vegetables.
It's extremely rigid, but feel like expresses a current desire, a mood, or in this case, a lack thereof. It's temporary.
It's not a permanent state of being.
Right. It communicates that this isn't a lifelong rule that you hate going out. It's just heavily tied to your internal state at this exact moment in time. It's a highly nuanced way to express yourself.
That makes total sense.
And then in that second sentence, we have turned out, which introduces the concept of phrasal verbs.
Oh boy, phrasal verbs. I have friends learning English who say these are the absolute bane of their existence.
Oh, they are notoriously difficult. The frustration comes from the fact that their meaning isn't obvious from the individual words.
Right.
The verb turn and the preposition out, if you analyze them separately, they do not logically combine to mean what turned out means.
They just don't.
But in this pattern, it turned out really well, it's used to describe an unexpected final result. It actually implies an entire narrative arc.
It's like a tiny, self-contained story.
Exactly. There was an initial expectation, an intervening event happened, and the conclusion was different than what was anticipated. All of that complex storytelling is just packed into those two little words.
So for you, the listener, the takeaway here is massive. If you learn the whole phrase, it turned out really well as a single chunk of sound, you completely bypass the agony of trying to logically parse out why turn and out mean result.
You don't even have to think about it.
You just grab the right conversational tool for the job. You speak in fluid thoughts rather than constantly pausing to calculate your next word.
You bypass the robotic speech entirely.
So we figured out how to safely express our own internal monologues and observations without sounding like a robot. But the stakes get much higher when you actually have to interact with other people.
Oh, absolutely.
If you get the phrasing wrong when you're just thinking out loud, no big deal. But if you get the phrasing wrong when you're asking someone for a favor or disagreeing with them, you don't just sound awkward, you sound rude.
Yes, the social friction is real.
Let's look at how these 8 to 15 word chunks act as social lifesavers.
Navigating choices and being polite are the absolute cornerstones of social fluency. And across different cultures, the psychological friction of making a direct request or stating a contrary preference, it varies wildly.
Right.
In English, directness can often be perceived as abrasive.
I've definitely experienced that friction. I remember traveling and trying to translate a simple preference directly from my head into English, and it came out sounding like a military command.
It happens to everyone.
The guide has a great example for how to avoid that trap. There's a sentence that goes, "I don't want to rush because I'd rather do it properly."
This is a vital pattern for anyone looking to sound natural.
Hmm.
Let's dissect the grammar of I'd rather, which is a contraction of I would rather, followed immediately by a base verb.
Okay.
It is an essential conversational tool for expressing a preference without burning bridges.
But why is it so much better than the alternatives? Like, why not just say, "I prefer to do it properly," or simply, "I want to do it properly"?
It comes back to that friction we were just talking about. I want is incredibly direct. In a professional setting or even a polite social setting, I want can sound demanding. It centers your ego.
Right, it's all about me.
Exactly. Now, I prefer is a bit formal, sometimes bordering on stiff or academic, but I would rather uses the modal verb would to create a hypothetical or conditional space in the conversation.
A hypothetical space. Wait, how does that soften the blow?
It essentially communicates, if we were in a perfect world and I was given the choice between these options, this is the path I naturally lean towards.
Ah, I see.
It removes the harsh reality of a demand. It allows you to firmly assert your preference while still appearing highly accommodating and respectful of the other person's agency.
It's almost like a linguistic shock absorber.
That is a perfect description.
These phrases just absorb the friction of a disagreement or a differing preference. You're navigating the bumps of social interaction smoothly, keeping everyone comfortable in the car, instead of just aggressively driving over the potholes.
Precisely.
The guide is actually full of these shock absorbers. It highlights phrases using instead of. For example, "Let's order some food instead of cooking tonight."
Notice what that sentence accomplishes. It proposes an alternative without directly criticizing the original plan.
Right. You aren't saying, "I am exhausted and I hate your cooking, let's order pizza."
Exactly. You're presenting a gentle, collaborative pivot. It maintains social harmony. And we see this even more clearly with polite modal requests. The text uses the example, "Could you please help me carry these bags into the house?"
As opposed to just yelling, "Carry these bags," or even just, "Can you carry these bags?"
The distinction between can you and could you is subtle but incredibly important.
How so?
Well, can you technically asks about someone's physical or logistical ability. It's binary, can you or can't you.
Okay, yeah.
But could you is a polite request that historically stems from asking about possibility. By asking about possibility rather than ability, you give the listener the psychological illusion of a choice.
Even if they don't really have one.
Right. Even if it's your boss asking you to do something, the phrasing allows them to save face. It's a grammatical dance.
And these 8 to 15 word sentences give you the entire rhythm of the dance step, rather than just handing you a manual that says, "Put your left foot here and bend your knee."
That's exactly the point.
It makes so much sense. So we've gone from internal feelings to navigating polite social interactions with our friends and family. Let's take these patterns out into the wider world, into the workplace or traveling. Because as I was reading the examples for these settings, I noticed the source material pulling off a rather brilliant trick.
It's engaging in a bit of grammatical smuggling, isn't it?
A total grammatical heist. Because while this text explicitly claims to be for beginners, there is some surprisingly complex, highly advanced grammar hiding in plain sight within these daily use sentences.
It really is.
They are smuggling the really hard stuff right past the learner's natural defenses.
They absolutely are. Let's look at the mechanics of the smuggling operation. The text provides a workplace example. I'll send you the document as soon as I finish it.
Okay.
And another one about daily motivation. Even though I'm tired, I still want to finish my work.
Okay, I have to stop you there and ask for some clarification because those do not look like beginner sentences to me. Mechanically, what is actually happening in those phrases?
Under the hood, they involve highly complex grammatical concepts. The phrase "as soon as" establishes a time-based condition.
Right.
It connects two future actions, dictating that the second action sending the document depends entirely and immediately on the completion of the first action.
Got it.
And the phrase "even though" sets up what we call a concession or a concessive clause.
A concessive clause.
Yes. It establishes a direct contrast between two realities. It is essentially saying, despite the indisputable truth of this first fact, that I am tired, the second fact, that I want to work, remains true.
Wait, hold on. Subordinating conjunctions, time-based conditions, concessive clauses. You're losing me.
I know, it sounds dense.
If I'm a beginner, my brain just completely shut off hearing those terms. It triggers test anxiety. How does memorizing an 8-word sentence about being tired actually stop me from having to learn those terrifying rules?
And this is the crux of the entire philosophy. In linguistics, we differentiate between explicit learning, which is memorizing the abstract rule for a concessive clause, and implicit learning, which is feeling the rhythm of the language naturally.
Okay, explicit versus implicit.
Right. The cognitive load of explicit learning is immense. It creates an effective filter. Basically, anxiety blocks your brain from absorbing the language.
Just stress just shuts you down.
Exactly. But by learning these complex concepts implicitly within an 8 to 15 word everyday chunk, the beginner completely bypasses the jargon.
They don't need to know the name of the tool or the physics of how the hammer was forged. They just need to know how it feels to swing it to drive a nail into a piece of wood.
Precisely. They learn how the grammar sounds in context. They internalize the melody of the condition and the contrast without ever opening a grammar workbook.
That is just brilliant.
And this reinforces the overarching philosophy we've been unpacking today. Success in language learning doesn't come from intellectually dominating isolated grammar rules or acing a multiple-choice test. Progress comes from this daily repetition, from shadowing natural speech, and from lowering your anxiety so your brain can actually absorb the patterns.
Wow. It really is a complete paradigm shift for anyone who grew up doing vocabulary drills. We've covered a lot of ground today, so let's do a quick recap to tie all these threads together for you.
Sounds good.
We've seen how focusing on sentences that are strictly 8 to 15 words long allows our working memory to grab onto complete contextual thoughts. By shadowing natural conversational patterns, things like "it seems" to soften our observations, turned out to tell a mini-story I'd rather to navigate social friction. And even complex structures like "even though" beginners can entirely bypass rigid, robotic memorization.
They learn to speak English as it is actually lived and breathed.
Exactly.
And if there is one core takeaway from the source material, it's a reminder found near the very end of the guide. It says, "Keep practicing English every day and you'll be surprised by your progress."
It's a great sentence.
It is a simple sentence, but it embodies the whole approach. It is a time-based condition and a positive result, delivered naturally. Consistent, low-stress exposure to natural chunks of language is the only true path to fluency.
It really is. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over today. We started this deep dive talking about how learning a foreign language, purely from a textbook, makes you sound like a robot, mechanically snapping building blocks together.
Right.
And we spent our time discovering how shadowing natural 8 to 15 word chunks of real conversation is the ultimate antidote to that robotic speech. But exploring all of this makes you wonder something profound about ourselves.
Oh.
Yeah. If this is definitively the most effective way to learn a new language, how much of our own native language, the thoughts in our head and the words that come out of our mouths every single day, are we simply shadowing for the people around us without even realizing it?
Oh, wow. That is a deeply fascinating question about human nature.
Are we ever really building our sentences from scratch? Or are we just echoing and remixing the conversational chunks we've collected from our families, our friends, and our culture over a lifetime? It's definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself casually saying, "It looks like it's going to rain." Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep practicing.